The wind howled through the dense pines, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of wet fur and blood. The crackling fire from the campfire flickered weakly, its light barely enough to cut through the overwhelming dark of the mountain pass. In the stillness, every sound seemed amplified: the distant howl of a wolf, the rustling of bushes, the creak of the wagon's old wooden wheels groaning under the weight of the journey. Emma's hands gripped the reins tightly, her knuckles white. She had traveled through this wilderness for days, the heavy weight of solitude pressing on her chest. There had been little to see except for miles of rugged terrain, untamed and harsh, stretching as far as the eye could see. The wagon's wheels churned through the thick mud of the mountain trail, the path steep and treacherous. Her heart thumped in her chest, a nervous rhythm that echoed her unease. It was the eerie quiet that unsettled her. The crickets had stopped chirping. Even the rustling trees had grown still, as if the whole world held its breath. She thought she heard a faint growl, low, menacing, coming from the shadows of the trees. She whipped the reins harder, urging the tired horses onward, but they were slowing, their bodies sinking into the soft earth beneath them. The growls grew louder, circling her in the dark. She squinted into the thick night, her eyes searching the forest, but there was nothing, just the oppressive silence. Suddenly, the bushes exploded. Out of the shadows emerged a pack of wolves, their eyes gleaming with hunger. The air filled with the harsh snap of their teeth as they rushed at the horses, biting, clawing. Emma screamed, but her voice was lost in the cacophony of snarls and growls. She scrambled for her rifle, her hands shaking as she fumbled for the barrel. Too late. One of the wolves lunged at her, its teeth snapping dangerously close. The horses screamed, rearing up in terror. Emma's heart hammered in her chest as she fought to stay on her feet. The attack came too fast, too fierce. The wolves were everywhere, clawing at her clothes, trying to drag her into the dark wilderness. And then, through the chaos, a figure emerged, tall, silent, almost ghostly in the moonlight. A mountain man, rugged and wild, his eyes hard like stone. The wolves stopped, sensing something stronger than fear. The man didn't move, his gaze steady as he drew something from the folds of his coat. His own pack of wolves, a force of nature unlike any she had ever seen before. Her breath caught. Who was this man? And how was he connected to the wolves? Was he their leader, or something else entirely? The question echoed in her mind. Would this stranger be her savior, or her doom? Emma Clark had always known that the frontier was a place of both opportunity and peril. The open land, the harsh beauty, the unforgiving wilderness. Every inch of it demanded respect, and yet, it had the power to break even the strongest of wills. She had felt that pull from the moment she'd set foot on the rugged plains, the mountains looming in the distance like silent guardians of secrets long buried. But nothing had prepared her for this journey. The past few years had been a blur, one moment of quiet desperation followed by another. She had left behind her family's modest farm in the east, hoping for something more in the wild unknown of the West. The promise of freedom, of starting over, had been too tempting to resist. But there were no promises out here, not in the wild frontier. No guarantees, just the open, endless sky and the chance to survive, if you could. Emma's face was drawn, pale beneath the sun's harsh glare, and her clothes hung loosely from her frame. The weathered brown coat she wore, cinched tight at the waist, had once belonged to her late brother, another casualty of this unforgiving land. Her eyes, once filled with youthful hope, were now hardened and suspicious, as if she had learned early that trusting people was a dangerous game. The lines on her face told a story of grief and struggle, and the scar that ran down her left cheek, jagged and raw, was a constant reminder of the violence she'd endured in her short time here. A scar she had never spoken of. Her mind often wandered back to the night it happened, a skirmish with a band of outlaws near the Wyoming border. They had taken her brother's life in cold blood, and Emma, in a desperate act of survival, had fought back. She had been lucky to escape with her life, but the price had been steep. The wound on her cheek was a reminder of her own fragility in a world where only the strong survived. It was a mark of her past, but also a wound that ran much deeper, a wound that refused to heal. Her brother's death had left an emptiness that no amount of travel could fill, and the loss weighed on her shoulders like a burden she could never lay down. Emma pulled the wagon slowly up the winding mountain trail, her hands gripping the reins tightly as the horses struggled under the weight of the supplies. Her eyes were focused on the steep incline ahead, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She couldn't shake the feeling that danger was following her, lurking just beyond her vision, a constant presence in the back of her mind. She had felt it for days now, ever since she had left the last town behind, with no one to speak to but herself and the eerie silence of the mountains. The air was thin and biting, and the higher she climbed, the more the land seemed to swallow her whole. The sparse landscape stretched out before her, tall, jagged peaks and wide expanses of nothingness. The dry, barren ground cracked underfoot, and the scent of sagebrush and pine mixed with the sharpness of the cold wind. It was a place that felt alive, yet unwelcoming, as though the land itself held secrets in its depths, secrets that would never be revealed to someone like her. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a twig snapping underfoot. Emma's breath caught. Her hand instinctively reached for the rifle strapped to her side, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't alone. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement, shadows in the trees, shifting and dancing with the breeze. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and her senses heightened. There was something else out here, something she couldn't see but could feel in every fiber of her being. She had no illusions about the dangers of the wilderness, outlaws, wild animals, and worse. But there was something else on her mind, something darker. A voice echoed in her memory, a voice she couldn't forget. The wolves are always watching. Never let your guard down. Her father's voice, ringing in her ears from a time when she was a child, still haunted her. She had never truly understood the weight of those words until now. In the wilderness, the wolves weren't just animals. They were symbols of something much greater, something that had stalked her since that fateful night. As she drove the wagon further into the heart of the mountains, Emma caught a glimpse of something moving in the distance, something that was neither animal nor man. Her eyes narrowed. The figure was distant, but something about it felt out of place. It was too still, too quiet, as if it were waiting, watching. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone, lost in the shadows of the trees. She wasn't sure what she had seen, but she knew one thing for certain. The danger she had been feeling was no longer a figment of her imagination. It was real, and it was closing in. The question lingered in her mind as the sun began to set behind the mountains. Who, or what, was out there? As the darkness of night crept in, Emma's grip on the reins tightened. She had no choice but to press forward, to trust that her instincts, the ones that had kept her alive thus far, would guide her through whatever was coming. But the feeling in the pit of her stomach, an unease, a foreboding sense of doom, told her that she was not alone in this wilderness. And soon, she would learn just how close the danger was. The first howl cut through the silence like a knife, sharp and guttural, echoing from the shadows of the trees. Emma's pulse quickened as she pulled the reins, urging the horses to keep moving despite the heavy weight of dread that had settled in her chest. She knew better than to stop now, knew that if she gave in to her fear, it could cost her everything. The horses snorted and shifted nervously under the weight of their harnesses, the sweat of the day clinging to their coats. She had to make it to the next town before nightfall. That was the plan, the goal. Safety, for a brief moment, before continuing on her long and lonely journey westward. The wagon creaked beneath her, its wheels struggling on the uneven, rocky trail as the fading sunlight dipped below the jagged peaks. The sky was alive with fiery reds and oranges, but Emma couldn't appreciate the beauty. Her mind was clouded with unease. Another howl sounded, closer this time. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She scanned the forest ahead, but saw nothing. The winds had shifted, carrying with them the unmistakable scent of wolves, wild, untamed, and on the hunt. It was not just wolves. There was something else in the air, something unnatural. As she turned her head, trying to peer through the gathering darkness, a shape flickered in the corner of her vision, something tall and dark, moving between the trees. Before she could react, a second figure appeared, then a third, emerging from the depths of the forest like ghosts. They moved with unnatural stealth, their figures barely discernible in the twilight. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew what they were, men, but they weren't like any men she had encountered before. These were not travelers or tradesmen. These were men of the wilderness, outlaws, hunters, or worse. Their clothing was weathered, patched, and stained, their faces hidden beneath broad-brimmed hats and scarves that concealed their identities. But their eyes, those eyes were cold, dead, as if they had long ago lost any trace of humanity. One of the men stepped forward, raising a hand to stop her. His voice was low, gravelly, and carried an edge that sent a chill crawling down her spine. "You're not going anywhere, lady," he said, his tone full of authority, like he had all the time in the world. "We've got business with you." Emma froze, her pulse racing. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The path was narrow, the trees too dense to hide in. The only option was forward or fight. She reached for the rifle strapped to her back, her fingers grazing the wood, but before she could pull it free, one of the other men appeared at her side, quick as a shadow. His grip was ironclad as he yanked her from the wagon, throwing her to the dirt. The jarring impact of the ground against her back knocked the breath from her chest. "Get off!" Emma spat, kicking and clawing at the man who had her in his grasp. She struggled, but he was too strong, his grip unyielding as he dragged her away from the wagon. "Not so fast," he sneered, his breath rancid with the smell of whiskey. He was taller than her, his face lined with dirt and age. But it was the gleam in his eyes, the cold, calculating stare, that terrified her more than anything. "Please," Emma gasped, her chest heaving. She could feel the weight of the rifle pressed against her back, but the man had already disarmed her. "Let me go? I haven't done anything to you." He laughed darkly, a sound that sent another wave of dread crashing over her. "You don't have to do anything to us, miss. We've got plans for you." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Emma's mind raced as she tried to think of an escape. The wolves' howls continued to echo through the mountains, but now they seemed far off. No, the real danger was here, in front of her. These men were not after her goods, not after her wagon. They were after something else, something far more sinister. Suddenly, the man holding her still froze. His eyes flickered over her shoulder, narrowing as if he saw something she couldn't. She twisted in his grasp, her eyes darting to the trees. Then, through the gloom of the forest, a figure emerged, a tall man, draped in the furs of wolves, his face shadowed beneath the hood of his cloak. His eyes were wild, piercing, and his presence was enough to send a ripple of unease through the men around her. It was as though the very air shifted when he stepped forward, a sense of control radiating from him like heat. The leader of the men stepped back, his mouth suddenly dry. "You're in my territory, stranger," he growled. The mountain man did not respond with words. Instead, he raised his hand, and a low, guttural growl reverberated from the shadows behind him. The trees seemed to part, revealing a pack of wolves, large, sleek, and wild, emerging like specters of the night. They circled, their eyes glowing in the fading light, their growls mixing with the rustling of the wind. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized what she was seeing. The man was not just a man. He was the leader of the wolves. His pack, his bond with them, was unspoken but undeniable. The outlaws exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do. But the mountain man didn't move a muscle, his eyes fixed on the leader of the men, as if daring him to make the next move. Emma's thoughts raced. What did these men want with her? And who was this man? This silent, imposing figure who seemed to control the wilderness itself. As the tension thickened in the air, a question lingered at the edge of her mind. Was she about to become a pawn in a much larger game? Before she could react, the mountain man's eyes locked onto hers, and for a split second, she felt as though he could see right through her. as if he knew the very fears that kept her awake at night. Then, without a word, he motioned for the wolves to move forward, silent and swift. The men didn't hesitate. One of them drew a knife, the blade glinting in the fading light. And in that moment, Emma knew nothing in her world would ever be the same again. The cold night pressed in, the shadows growing longer and more ominous as Emma was pulled along by the rough, silent mountain man. His grip on her wrist was like iron, and she was too weary to fight it. The wolves, though silent and still, were ever present, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, a reminder of the strange alliance between man and beast. Every time she glanced toward them, their stares seemed to burn right through her, as though they knew her, or perhaps were watching her every move, waiting for a signal. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. They didn't speak. The mountain man didn't need words to lead her through the thickening woods. His presence alone was enough to keep her in line. Emma tried to pull away, to break free, but he was unyielding, his hand firm and purposeful as he led her deeper into the wilderness. The outlaws, those who had taken her from her wagon, hadn't made a move since the mountain man appeared. They lingered at the edge of the clearing, hesitant, as if caught between fear and greed. Emma knew that they were watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike. But the mountain man, standing like a silent sentinel, seemed to have more control over the situation than anyone realized. As the night deepened, the land around them shifted. What had been a dense forest became a sparse, rocky terrain, the ground rising sharply. The mountain path was narrow and treacherous, the wind howling through the trees like a warning. The wolves, now following in their wake, made no sound. Yet Emma could feel their presence all around her, their steady pacing keeping her on edge. The man's face remained hidden beneath his fur-lined cloak, but his movements were deliberate, purposeful, as though he knew this land better than anyone else. He walked with the same confidence he had shown when confronting the outlaws. There was no hesitation in his steps, no uncertainty in his direction. And yet, every time Emma stole a glance at him, she felt a pang of unease, a tightening in her chest. Who was he? And why had he chosen to help her? She had never seen a man like him, silent, powerful, and wrapped in mystery. For hours, they walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of their boots on the cold earth and the faint rustling of the wolves' paws behind them. The air grew colder, and the moon began its ascent into the sky, casting long shadows across the path. Emma could feel the weight of the night pressing down on her, as though it would swallow them whole if they weren't careful. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the thoughts gnawing at her. Who were these men? The outlaws hadn't seemed interested in stealing her goods. They had wanted something else. But what? And why had the mountain man intervened? The sound of the wolves growling softly behind them brought her back to reality. She turned her head, but the animals were too far behind to make out clearly. She had learned to trust her instincts when it came to danger, and everything inside her screamed that there was more to this situation than she understood. The journey was wearing on her, the exhaustion setting in as the hours dragged on. She had no choice but to keep moving, even if every step felt like a burden. The mountain man showed no sign of slowing, his pace unwavering. There was no way to predict where he was taking her. It was as if he had no destination, no plan, other than to keep her moving through the night, through the wilderness. The wolves had stopped growling, and the silence between them was deafening. The man was hiding something. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the cold air biting at her skin. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together what she knew about him, and what she didn't. His silence, his strange connection with the wolves, his refusal to give her any answers. It all painted a picture of a man who was as much a mystery as the land itself. And that, more than anything, unsettled her. Suddenly, the man stopped in his tracks. Emma nearly stumbled forward, caught off guard by the sudden halt. The wolves, sensing his pause, instinctively followed suit, their bodies tensing as they looked to their leader for guidance. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The forest had shifted again. They were no longer on the narrow, rocky trail. The trees had opened up, revealing a wide, darkened valley beneath them. There was something wrong about it. The air felt thick, stifling, as though it carried an unease with it. The mountains in the distance seemed to loom over them like silent sentinels, watching with eyes of stone. The trees stood like twisted sentinels, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. It was a place that didn't feel natural, a place where the wind didn't sing and the earth didn't breathe. The mountain man didn't move. "Where are we?" Emma asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. He didn't answer. Her heart pounded louder in her ears, and for the first time since they had left the path, she saw something shift in his eyes. A faint, almost imperceptible flicker. Was it fear? Before she could speak again, a figure stepped out of the shadows, emerging from the trees on the far side of the valley. A man, cloaked in tattered rags, his face covered by a mask of leather and dirt. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The stranger's presence sent a wave of unease rippling through her. There was something familiar about him, something unsettling. His eyes, dark and piercing, locked onto hers, and she felt an immediate chill run down her spine. The mountain man tensed, his hand moving to the hilt of the knife at his belt. But the stranger didn't seem interested in confrontation. Instead, he raised his hand, signaling for peace. "I've been waiting for you," the man said, his voice low and raspy. The words sent an uncomfortable shiver through Emma, as though they were meant for someone else. Someone who had been expected long before she arrived. The mountain man stiffened. "You should not be here," he growled, his voice colder than the wind. Emma watched the exchange with growing confusion. She could feel the tension between the two men, something ancient, something heavy. It was as if they were on opposite sides of a much larger battle, one that had been waging long before she entered this world. The stranger's lips curled into a smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "It's not a choice anymore, is it?" The mountain man's jaw clenched. "You don't know what you're meddling with." As the two men stood locked in a silent standoff, Emma's instincts screamed at her to move, to escape, but she was paralyzed, trapped between two forces she didn't understand. She had no idea who this man was or what he wanted, but it was clear that something was about to shift. Something was about to break. The wolves growled again, low and menacing, as the stranger stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the mountain man. And in that moment, Emma realized something she hadn't yet dared to consider. She was no longer just a traveler in the wilderness. She was caught in the middle of something much larger than herself. Something dangerous. Something that had been waiting for her all along. And she wasn't sure if she could survive it. But one thing was certain. The journey had just begun. Emma stood frozen, her mind reeling from the encounter with the masked man. She had expected danger, of course. She was in the wild, at the mercy of the untamed mountains. But this felt different. This wasn't just a chance encounter. The tension, the words exchanged between the two men, it was as if she had walked into a story that had already been written long before she arrived. A story she was now part of. The mountain man, his face grim and hard as stone, seemed to know the stranger far too well. The way his hand rested on the knife handle, the slight twitch in his jaw, it was clear there was a history between them, one filled with hostility, maybe even hatred. Emma's heart pounded as she tried to process the situation, but before she could speak again, the stranger's voice cut through the thick air like a blade. "You don't understand yet, do you?" The words were heavy with meaning, and they made Emma's blood run cold. The stranger took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're not here by accident. None of this is." The mountain man shifted uneasily, his grip on the knife tightening. His dark eyes flicked toward Emma, a brief flash of something. Regret, perhaps? Or was it guilt? Emma took a step back, confusion swirling in her mind. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" The stranger smiled again, but this time, it was a twisted, knowing smile. "You were always meant to be here, Emma. Your family, their death, your capture, the attack on your wagon. It was all part of it." Emma's breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening as she tried to make sense of his words. Her family's death? What was he saying? "You don't understand," the mountain man growled, taking a step forward, his tone suddenly defensive. "He's lying. This isn't her fault. This is between us." Emma turned her gaze from the stranger to the mountain man, her heart beating faster. "What is he talking about? Who are you?" The mountain man's face tightened as if he had just been struck. For a moment, he hesitated, his eyes flickering with something Emma couldn't quite decipher. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke. "I never wanted this for you." The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded with implication. Emma's mind reeled, trying to piece together the puzzle, but it wasn't coming together. What was happening? Who was this man, really? And why had he come for her? Before she could demand another answer, the stranger's voice sliced through her thoughts. You're more connected to all of this than you realize. Your father, he was part of something much bigger. And you? You've always been at the center of it. The truth hit Emma like a physical blow. She staggered, her legs threatening to give way beneath her. My father? What do you mean? The stranger's eyes darkened, his smile fading as he took a step back, his gaze shifting to the mountain man. Your father made a deal, one that would bring great power to his family. But when he realized the cost, he tried to pull away. He tried to protect you. He looked at Emma, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her skin prickle. But that didn't stop the world from coming for you. The mountain man flinched, his hand tightening on the knife again. But it wasn't a defensive move. It was something else. Something deeper. I told him it was too dangerous. The mountain man muttered under his breath, almost as if speaking to himself. I told him he should have left it all behind. But he didn't listen. Emma's pulse raced as the pieces of the story began to click together, but it wasn't enough. She needed more. The weight of the revelation was too much to handle all at once, her mind scrambling to make sense of the tangled web she was caught in. The stranger stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. Your father was part of a group that would stop at nothing to control the land, to control power. And when he betrayed them, he put you on the path to destruction. You think your father's death was an accident? No, he was silenced to ensure that you didn't discover the truth. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Betrayed? Her father had betrayed someone? But why hadn't she ever known about any of this? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of rustling in the bushes behind them. Her heart stopped. Something wasn't right. The mountain man's eyes darted toward the sound, his posture tensing. No, he muttered under his breath. We don't have time for this. Before Emma could process what was happening, a sharp whistle pierced the night air, a signal. Then, with a terrifying speed, figures began to emerge from the shadows. More men, clad in dark clothing, their faces hidden behind masks. They moved like ghosts, surrounding them in an instant, cutting off any escape. The mountain man's eyes narrowed, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his knife. It's a trap. Emma's pulse spiked as the weight of their situation sank in. She wasn't just running from outlaws or wolves. This was bigger. The men closing in on them weren't just bandits. They were part of something. Something far darker than she could have imagined. And she was in the center of it. The stranger, still standing off to the side, gave a slow, deliberate clap. You thought you were safe, didn't you? He took a step forward, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. I never expected you to get this far. But now, you see the truth. Your father's enemies are here, and they've been waiting for you. All along. The mountain man took a step toward Emma, his eyes locked onto hers with a look of regret. I never wanted you involved in this. But there's no turning back now. They're coming for you. All of you. The men closed in, their movements quick and fluid, like wolves stalking their prey. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, but even as the reality of their situation set in, she couldn't tear her gaze away from the mountain man. Who could she trust now? Before she could react, a flash of movement from behind her sent her stumbling forward. The sound of metal slicing through the air, a sharp scream, and everything went black. Emma collapsed to the ground, her mind reeling from the sudden onslaught. The mountain man lunged forward, a howl of fury escaping his lips, but it was too late. The masked figures descended upon them, and in a blur of chaos, the world around Emma went dark, swallowed by the night. The world spun as Emma's vision swam back into focus. She gasped for breath, her chest tight as though an iron band had wrapped around her ribs. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, dust, and the metallic tang of blood. Her ears rang from the sudden chaos, the world moving in sharp, disjointed flashes. She was on the ground, pressed against the cold, hard earth. Her legs ached from the fall, and her body felt heavy, weighted down by the dread that had taken root in her heart. Her first thought was the mountain man. Where was he? As the fog of panic cleared, she saw him. He was locked in a brutal struggle with one of the masked men, a dark figure pressing a knife against his throat. The mountain man's hands were bloodied, his face smeared with dirt and sweat, but his eyes still burned with the fire of someone who refused to surrender. He fought like a beast, feral and desperate, but the odds were against him. They always had been. Emma tried to move, to help him, but the world tilted beneath her. Her legs were unsteady, and the weight of everything pressing down on her, the lies, the betrayals, the violence, felt unbearable. She could hardly breathe, but somehow, she forced herself to push up onto her hands and knees. Her gaze flicked back to the fight. She needed to do something. The masked men were closing in, their faces impassive, cold. They didn't care who lived or died. They had one goal, her. Emma had become the target. Her father's legacy was now her burden, and the people chasing her wanted it gone. A loud crack pierced the air as one of the masked men swung a heavy club at the mountain man, knocking him to the ground. The mountain man's head hit the earth with a sickening thud, and Emma's stomach lurched. "No!" she screamed, her voice breaking. In that moment, something inside Emma snapped. She couldn't let him die, not like this. She couldn't let the world fall into the hands of these faceless killers. Not when there was a chance, however small, to stop them. Her hand shot to the ground beside her, and she grabbed the first weapon she could find, a jagged rock, sharp and heavy. With a fierce scream, she charged at the nearest masked man, her arms swinging wildly. The rock collided with his skull, the crack echoing through the night. The man crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he even hit the dirt. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't pause. She ran toward the mountain man, who was struggling to rise, blood dripping from the side of his head where the club had struck him. "Get up," she shouted, urgency in her voice. "We have to move now." But the mountain man shook his head, his eyes clouded with pain. "It's too late, Emma," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "They'll keep coming for you. No matter where you run, it's never going to end." His words hit her like a physical blow, a harsh truth, one that she didn't want to hear, but she knew it was inevitable. The fight, the danger, it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about finding a way to stop the inevitable. Could she? Could she be the one to break the cycle? She grabbed him by the shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "We can fight this. Together. You said they wanted me. Well, I'm not going to give in. Not now. Not ever." His eyes softened, but his expression was still a grim mask of determination. He let out a low sigh, as if resigning himself to some fate. "I didn't want you dragged into this, Emma. It's bigger than both of us." Her gaze hardened, resolve settling into her bones. "It's bigger than me, but I'm already in it. You said my father made a deal, so why didn't he finish it? What was so dangerous that they had to kill him?" The mountain man's face hardened again, his gaze shifting to the distant horizon. He made a deal with the wrong people, and when they came to collect, he thought he could double-cross them. He tried to get out, and they killed him for it. Emma felt her heart drop into her stomach. Her father had betrayed them. The realization crashed over her like a wave, leaving her breathless. She had always thought her father was a good man, a man who had made mistakes but had meant well. But now, she saw him for what he truly was, a man who had played a dangerous game with lives, including his own daughters. The betrayal stung like salt in a wound, and yet, Emma knew she had no time to mourn. The present was the only thing that mattered now. "We don't have time for this," she said, standing taller. "We have to keep moving. Now." With one last, hesitant glance, the mountain man nodded, pushing himself up onto his feet with Emma's help. Together, they ran, the sound of pursuing footsteps echoing in the distance. The woods were thick around them, dark shadows that seemed to watch every step they took. They pushed through the brush, breathing hard, their hearts racing. Emma's mind was spinning, her thoughts clouded with everything she had just learned, and what that knowledge would mean for her future. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was leading to a final confrontation, one that would leave her broken or victorious. Then, as they broke through the trees and into a small clearing, a sharp crack pierced the silence. Emma froze. Her heart dropped as she turned to look at the mountain man, who was already reaching for his knife. "I knew they'd find us here," he muttered, a grim smile pulling at his lips. More masked figures emerged from the shadows, their faces shadowed, weapons in hand. They weren't here to negotiate or even to talk. They were here to kill. "You can't run anymore, Emma," the lead man said, his voice cold and distant. "The game is over." With a final, desperate roar, the mountain man lunged at them, his knife flashing in the moonlight. Emma ran toward him, adrenaline flooding her veins, but the truth was undeniable. They were surrounded. There was no way out. No more places to hide. But she refused to give up. Not yet. As the battle began in earnest, Emma fought alongside him, their fates entwined in a desperate, bloody struggle for survival. With every strike, she fought not just for her life, but for the legacy of her father, for the mountain man, for the people she could save, and for the future she would take into her own hands. The truth had been revealed, and now the real fight had begun. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she stood on the precipice, the world spinning around her. The sky above was a bruised, deep purple as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers from the blackened forest behind her. Every muscle in her body screamed with exhaustion, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But she knew that this was the moment, her moment. The final confrontation. The leader of the masked men stepped forward, his dark figure silhouetted against the dying light. His cold smile twisted in the corner of his mouth, as if savoring the inevitable end of the chase. "You've been running for too long, Emma," the man said, his voice a low, cruel drawl. "Your father's mistakes have brought you here. And now, we finish what he started." Emma's gaze flicked to the ground beneath her. A sheer drop led into the river below, the water crashing violently against the rocks below. There was no way out, no escape from the trap they'd set for her. Her mind raced with the weight of everything that had happened. Her father's betrayal, the mountain man's sacrifice, the lies she'd uncovered. It all had led to this cruel moment. Her hands trembled as she gripped the knife tightly, its cold steel cutting into her skin, but she knew it was her only option. She had no choice now. The mountain man's words echoed in her mind. Fight until the end. She clenched her jaw and turned to face the leader, her eyes steely with resolve. "You won't win," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I won't let you destroy everything my father fought for." The leader laughed, a dark, hollow sound that sent chills down her spine. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing. Just a girl trying to fill the shoes of a dead man." Her pulse quickened as the tension in the air thickened. She could see the movement of the other masked men behind him, closing in from every angle. They'd cornered her. They had no intention of letting her leave alive. But Emma wasn't going to make it easy for them. She refused to go down without a fight. The leader lunged toward her, his hand outstretched, but Emma was quicker. She ducked, rolling to the side and thrusting her knife out in a swift motion. It connected with the arm of one of the attackers, sending him stumbling backward with a shout of pain. The others hesitated for a moment, surprised by her defiance. And in that split second, Emma's adrenaline surged. She was faster, sharper now, fueled by rage, grief, and a determination to make it through this nightmare. She spun, using her legs to propel herself forward, her hands steady as she fought off another assailant. Her movements were a blur of quick strikes, the sound of metal clashing against metal filling the air. For the first time since everything had started, Emma felt in control. The knife in her hand became an extension of herself, an instrument of survival. But then, amidst the chaos, she saw something that made her heart stop. The mountain man. He was standing in the shadows, his hand clutched to his side where blood had begun to seep through his torn shirt. His face was pale, but his eyes, they were fierce, unwavering. He had returned, and he was alive. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she realized what this meant. He had come back for her. He had sacrificed himself to give her this chance. But there was no time to think about that. The fight raged on. Emma threw herself back into the battle, her every motion fueled by the knowledge that this was it. This was the moment where everything changed. Her mind raced as she cut through the crowd of attackers. She had to finish this. She had to end the cycle of violence that had started with her father's mistakes. But as the leader advanced again, his eyes narrowed. Calculating, she saw the true terror in his eyes. He knew something she didn't. "Did you think you could defeat me?" The leader sneered, grabbing her by the wrist and twisting it painfully. "You've lost. You've been outplayed from the beginning." Emma's heart skipped a beat as he pulled her close, the cold blade of his knife flashing in his hand. Her blood ran cold, but she didn't show fear. She fought against him, twisting her body to free herself. His grip was iron, but there was a weakness in him, a crack in his confidence. Before she could react, there was a sharp crack, the sound of a gunshot cutting through the chaos. For a moment, everything froze. Emma's heart lurched. The leader's eyes widened, and his hand dropped from her wrist. The mountain man stood at the edge of the clearing, his rifle raised, his breath coming in ragged bursts. His chest was heaving with pain, his legs unsteady, but he had made it. He had saved her. "Move," he shouted, his voice hoarse with pain. The leader turned, and in that instant, Emma struck. She drove the knife into his side, the force of the blow propelling him backward. He gasped, a strangled cry escaping his lips as he collapsed to the ground, his hand clutching at the wound. She stood over him, the world spinning, her hands shaking with the aftermath of the fight. Her pulse raced in her ears, the gravity of what she'd just done sinking in. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Emma felt the weight of the fear lift off her shoulders. But just as she began to breathe, the mountain man stumbled forward, his expression one of fierce pain. Blood soaked his shirt, staining his skin. Emma's heart clenched as he collapsed to his knees, clutching his side. "No, no, no," she whispered, rushing to his side. "You can't." His eyes flickered to hers, his lips curling into a weak smile. "You did it, Emma. You won." Tears blurred her vision as she tried to hold him, tried to keep him with her. But his body was too cold, too still. She could feel him slipping away. "I couldn't let you die. I couldn't lose you," she sobbed, her voice breaking. He reached up with trembling fingers and touched her cheek, his hand warm despite the blood that covered him. "You never will," he whispered, his voice fading. With a final breath, the mountain man exhaled, his body going limp in her arms. Emma's world went dark as grief consumed her, the victory turning bitter in her mouth. She had saved herself. She had saved the legacy of her father. But in doing so, she had lost the one person who had shown her what it meant to fight, to survive. Her hands trembled as she closed his eyes, the weight of everything crashing over her. The fight was over, but the price had been too high. Cliffhanger. As Emma rose to her feet, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the forest. The battle might have ended, but the war was far from over. The men who had followed her father's footsteps were still out there, and they would come for her. Emma had survived, but now she had to fight for her future. With the mountain man's legacy in her hands, she turned to face the coming storm. The fight was hers, and she wasn't running anymore. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky with streaks of deep orange and crimson as Emma stood silently by the river, her reflection rippling with the gentle flow of the water. The fire was gone now, nothing left but cold embers, but the heat of the journey still burned inside her. She had survived. Survived the wolves. Survived betrayal. Survived the storm that had ripped apart her past. The mountain man was gone, but his legacy lived within her, a legacy of strength, resilience, and silence that spoke louder than words ever could. His face lingered in her memory, and though the grief still clung to her heart like a weight, there was something else now too, a quiet peace. A sense of finality that whispered in the corners of her mind, even as the world around her seemed uncertain. Her hands were still stained, not just with blood, but with all the choices she had made, the lives that had shifted with her decisions. She couldn't escape it. Her father's shadow would always be there, a ghost haunting every step, every turn. But that wasn't her life anymore. Not after everything she'd faced. She looked toward the horizon where the riders had come and gone, each one casting a long shadow as they disappeared into the dusk. Her mind flickered back to the moment she'd handed the leader the letter, her father's letter, knowing it held answers she might never fully understand. She had done it because it wasn't just about the past. It was about everything she had yet to discover. It wasn't over. Not yet. Her gaze drifted to the mountains in the distance, their jagged peaks cutting the sky like the edge of a blade. She could feel the weight of all the unanswered questions pulling at her. The mountain man's pack had left behind more than just tracks in the dirt. They had left behind a question that gnawed at her, one that would not let her rest. Was he really gone? Was it possible that someone could disappear so completely? No, she couldn't afford to think that way. She couldn't afford to believe the world had taken everything from her, because there was still so much more to fight for. Suddenly, a sound, a whisper on the wind. She turned quickly, her heart racing, only to see the figure emerging from the shadows. She froze, breath caught in her throat. It was him, the mountain man, or at least, the man she thought she had buried beneath the rocks. His eyes, dark and sharp as ever, met hers, and the world seemed to still. For a moment, there was no past, no betrayal, no wolves or riders, just this impossible moment, standing together in the twilight. "You," she breathed, almost in disbelief. "How?" His lips twitched into something resembling a smile, but it was strained, faint, as though he, too, was unsure of what came next. "I should have told you," he said, his voice low and rough, like the sound of distant thunder. "But some things are better left unsaid." Her heart thundered in her chest. Everything had changed, but so much had remained the same. The truths were out there now, buried in the bones of the mountains. She didn't know what his return meant, or what it would mean for her future, but she knew one thing. She couldn't leave it like this. "I'm sorry," she whispered, stepping toward him. "I didn't," but he raised a hand, halting her. "We don't have time for apologies, Emma." His words held weight, like the storm before a battle. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Emma felt something stir inside her. It wasn't a sense of victory or relief. It was the weight of the journey still ahead. They stood there, gazing at each other in the fading light, the world around them echoing with the weight of all they had survived, all they had lost, and all that was yet to come. He took a step back, his eyes flickering toward the horizon where the riders had vanished. "We have unfinished business," he said, his tone calm but firm. "The past is never really gone, and neither are the enemies who made it." Emma's heart skipped a beat. There was something in his words, a promise or a warning. She couldn't tell, but it sent a shiver through her. She wasn't done yet. She wasn't free. "You don't have to fight alone anymore," he added quietly, as if reading her thoughts. But Emma could only stare at him, the weight of his words sinking in. He was right. The past was never truly gone. But there was something else now, something deeper than the loss. It was the will to keep moving forward, no matter what. No matter who or what came for them. And as the last traces of daylight slipped away, she realized something. No one would ever be the same after everything that had happened. The past had shaped them, but the future was still in their hands. There was no true end here. Only a long, winding road ahead, filled with more challenges, more secrets, and the possibility of something more. Emma wasn't sure what awaited her, but she had learned enough by now to know that she could face it. A final silence hung between them before he turned, gesturing toward the distant mountains. "Ready?" he asked, his voice steady, a flicker of hope, and something else beneath it. Emma hesitated for just a moment, her heart still heavy with everything that had come before. But she looked at him, really looked at him, and the weight lifted slightly. There was a future, uncertain and fraught with danger, but it was hers to claim. "Let's go," she said softly. As they walked side by side into the gathering night, the question that had lingered in her mind since the beginning still hung in the air. What would they find next? And perhaps, just perhaps, it was that uncertainty, the mystery, that would drive them forward. Together. For now, that was enough.